Good morning. Ah. Let's see. Is anybody reading the book of the month along? You know, every now and then when one of these recommended books come my way, it touches something in me and I find myself really getting into it. This one is particularly powerful. I even got it on my Kindle so I can read it wherever I am with it because it's inspiring, but there's also some challenging bits. So the book is Living Buddha, Living Christ by Thich Nhat Hanh, and this week's assigned reading is entitled For a Future to Be Possible. And it starts like this. There is a deep malaise in society. We can send emails and faxes anywhere in the world. We have pages and cell phones, and yet in our families and neighborhoods, we do not speak to each other. There is a kind of vacuum inside us, and we attempt to fill it by eating and reading, talking, smoking, drinking, watching TV, going to movies, and even overworking. We absorb so much violence and insecurity every day that we are like time bombs ready to explode. We need to find a cure for our illness. Amazing. I was listening to an expert on social media, and she said that today in our world, more people own cell phones than own toothbrushes. Yeah. And another statistic, I think this one came from a Google executive, I'm not sure, but he said that more people have access to cellular service because there's a tower everywhere than they have access to high-quality water, indoor plumbing, or consistent electricity. But the idea is not to make one the enemy of the other. It's how to put this amazing technology to excellent use in our world. Well, I just did that this morning, sitting right there. I got my cell phone out and I made a contribution using that organization, Charity Water, to give the gift of clean, fresh water to those people who are affected by the earthquake in Nepal. It's an amazing organization, and 100% of your donation goes directly to where it's needed. Now, that's an amazing use of technology. But technology by itself isn't the whole solution. It's not enough. I've been listening to the audiobook version of the Dalai Lama's Path to Tranquility as I walk and hike and do things like that, because today, in this month, we're looking at that place where Christianity intersects with Buddhism, and so I've been listening to the Dalai Lama. And he, on this very topic, says, material progress alone is not sufficient to achieve an ideal society. It's not enough. Even in countries like ours, where great external progress has been made, mental problems have increased. No amount of legislation or coercion can accomplish the well-being of society, for this depends upon the internal attitude of the people who comprise it. And that would probably have a lot of resonance with us who call the Center for Spiritual Living our way, because that's what it's about to us. The internal attitude of the people is where it all happens, because we've got this idea that we can promote global well-being, global transformation, but the way to that is through the individual. So we focus less on outer works than we do on inner combustion. So once we've provided the inspiration for the individual and the education, then we trust that will propel each person to do what they need to do to bring fresh water or change or whatever it is in the world. We call that vision the global vision. A world that works for everyone through individual waking up. In the book, Living Buddha, Living Christ, Thich Nhat Hanh suggests that one way to do this is through our religious and spiritual traditions. He suggests that there are jewels in the sacred traditions of our world, whatever yours is, if we would but study them and integrate them that the spiritual traditions and the religious traditions of the world will provide for us a guide for how to live in harmony with our world and with each other, if that is what we're looking for. If we're looking for it. So looking at Buddhism and Christianity, we begin with Thich Nhat Hanh's writing, and he quotes the very well-known 5 precepts of Buddhism. And they are: the first one, reverence for life, all life. And the second is abstaining from taking that which is not given. And he calls that generosity practice. And the third is a responsible sexual, and sometimes it's described as sensual, responsible sensual behavior. And the fourth is mindful speaking and listening, mindfulness in communication. And the last one is mindfulness in consumption, ingesting wholesome substances. And Thich Nhat Hanh did something very wonderful. He took these and he rewrote them in his own words. It's a very powerful practice to do, to take some important work, a passage that you're working on and want to study, and then to rewrite it in your own words. I've done that several times with books or chapters in books that I'm wrestling with. Maybe I don't fully understand it yet and I want to integrate it, and I sit down and I handwrite it in longhand as if I'm explaining it to myself. It's a very powerful meditative practice. In fact, I did it with the opening 4 chapters of our own textbook, The Science of Mind, because I don't know if you've ever read the opening 4 chapters. It's dense. It's meaty. So I had to sit down and I had to write a paraphrase of it, explaining it to myself. It's very valuable. I did the same thing with the Bhagavad Gita because I really wanted to get into it. I wanted to go deep into it. So I sat and I wrote it down in my own words, paraphrased it and simplified it so I could have it for myself. In fact, that paraphrase forms the foundation of the class you heard announced earlier on, the Bhagavad Gita for Beginners. And it's also available as an ebook, but it's inside the class. And doing that practice of summarizing it is a way of absorbing it in a much deeper level, in a meditative way, and integrating it, because you're going to discover, if you do this, you're going to discover the answer to the question, what does this mean to me? And that's the way that the teaching can come alive in you, because you're going to go beyond the surface teaching. In Buddhism, they refer to this going deep and going beyond the surface in this way. The 4 reliances say, rely on the message of the teacher, not on the teacher. Rely on the meaning, not just the words. And rely on the complete meaning, not just the partial or the provisional meaning. You got to go further. And rely on your wisdom mind, not just your ordinary mind. This one's hard to translate, but you get the point. There are layers of meaning, and I think that's what Jesus was referring to when in teaching his parables, he taught in layers of meaning, and he said, let those who have ears listen, because you got to go past the obvious into the ambiguous. You got to go past the surface. You got to go into deep. Because on the surface, any teaching can be used for any purpose. Just depends on what you're looking for in your heart. Because if violence is part of your future plan, then any religion will do. You can use any one of them. If bringing fresh water to people who are stressed because of natural disasters is part of your future plan, any religion will do. Because no matter what religion the person is, it's still up to the individual to extract from it that which will motivate them into beneficial action. To create the future. And today in particular in our world, we cannot afford to rely on any teacher, any politician, any leader, any newspaper, any book, any religion, any TV series, any film star, any minister to tell us what to think. No, for a future to be possible, we are going to have to take responsibility to think, and to think deep, and to think through, and to think past the surface, and to take responsibility. Otherwise, the future belongs not to us, but to those who are shaping it for us through media, through reporting, through trending, through influence. Well, what stops a person from shaping the future? Well, the Dalai Lama says it's laziness. Laziness, he says, will stop you, will thwart your spiritual progress. And he lists 3 particular kinds of laziness. Who knew? The first kind of laziness is the laziness of inactivity. Sometimes it's translated the laziness of indolence. Inactivity, that's when you have an inclination to putting things off, procrastination, doing it later. Nothing happens. No progress, no personal progress, no societal progress. The second kind of laziness is the laziness of inferiority, where you dwell in the undervaluing of your own capacity. This is where you criticize yourself, you compare yourself so much you never do anything. And the third laziness is the laziness of attachment to negative actions. That's when you put greater effort into that which is not useful than you put effort into that which is useful. What a lovely way to start your Sunday. But let us go to Thich Nhat Hanh's rewrite of the precepts. The first, reverence for life. And in his rewriting, he's turned it into a beautiful promise for himself. Here's what he said about reverence for all life. Aware of the suffering caused by the destruction of life, I vow to cultivate compassion and learn ways to protect the lives of people, animals, plants, and minerals. I am determined not to kill, not to let others kill, and not to condone any act of killing in the world, in my thinking and in my way of life. So what a beautiful personal commitment. Beautiful personal commitment to himself. So it brings up the question then, well, what would reverence for life mean to you? It's an invitation for you to discover your own commitment. How would you express it in your own words, and how do you show reverence for life if that's in your heart? And what is the teaching of the Center for Spiritual Living in this regard? Well, at the center we teach that all life is divine, and that all form, everything is a result of the working of this divine mind. And there are no restrictions on how we are to treat it. There's absolute freedom in this regard. However, there are consequences. For example, consequences for killing, for practicing killing. Consequences that go beyond the settling of balances, like in an eye for an eye, goes way beyond that. The practice of killing sets in motion some fearsome energy according to the reflective nature of the universe. The second one is abstain from taking what is not given. And he expresses this one as the practice of generosity. And here's how he rewrote it as a beautiful vow, a beautiful promise to himself. Aware of the suffering caused by exploitation, social injustice, stealing, and oppression, I vow to cultivate loving kindness and learn ways to work for the well-being of people, animals, plants, and minerals. I vow to practice generosity by sharing my time, energy, and material resources with those who are in real need. I'm determined not to steal and not to possess anything that should belong to others. I will respect the property of others, and I will prevent others from profiting from human suffering or the suffering of other species on earth. It's beautiful. Such a deep commitment. And I express this particular one as non-taking. And I explore, what does non-taking mean to me? It's very important to me. And how can I form a beautiful promise around this idea of non-taking? And what is the teaching of the center? Well, we teach that in this spiritual reality that we call life, there is a governance. We are governed by spiritual laws, and it is called the law of cause and effect, which, it says in our textbook, is a taskmaster to the unwise and a servant to the wise. In other words, when I don't know the law of cause and effect, it seems like the world is working against me. And when I do know the law of cause and effect, then I can choose to be in alignment with it. In other words, it doesn't matter if you are wise or unwise. We all have to pay the piper. In other words, steal and it will be stolen from you, according to the self-regulating system of the spiritual universe. Well, with that in mind, then I can ask myself, well, what commitment do I want to make to myself when it comes to this non-taking or practice of generosity? In the Jewish and Christian tradition, in the Ten Commandments, it is put quite candidly as, "Thou shalt not steal." It might have followed up by explaining, because the consequences of doing so are very difficult to live with. And then in that light, the Ten Commandments are not so much a list of don'ts, but a list of guidelines that explain what happens when we live outside of spiritual law. At the center, we teach there is no punishment imposed upon us by an external God, but there is the automatic result of failing to properly use the spiritual laws that govern the universe. You know, before I knew about the law of cause and effect, I used to just think I was lucky enough to escape it, to slip under the radar. And I'll be very specific. Before I started to study this, I used to think that taking a little from those who had was okay. It wasn't a big deal. Everybody did it, and they probably wouldn't notice. That's really where my consciousness was. Thought it was okay. Now, remember when it first came to light to me when I read an article that explained how in corporate America, the annual estimated loss to businesses as a result of the petty taking of employees was around the $5 billion. I'm talking about the kind of small taking, make a personal copy on the copy machine, take a paper clip, use a stamp to process my bills, use my time at work to shop on Amazon or put my profile up on the dating service. Right? And I remember my thinking at the time was, well, it doesn't mean anything. It's just a little something. It doesn't make an impact. Why the big deal? But then I learned about the law of cause and effect, and it caused me to start noticing the little ways where I was making it okay to steal. I was normalizing the act of taking attention, taking credit, taking a stamp. It didn't matter, but it was so normal in me that it was a way of life. And I had to begin the necessary adjustments to stop that, to interrupt that. And when I began to interrupt that, I noticed my life opened up. Because I was working less against the spiritual laws as I was working in harmony with them. I didn't have to take anymore. The next one, responsible sensual behavior. It's a particularly Buddhist perspective that Thich Nhat Hanh is going to express in this one. And I share it with you because we are looking at the many different paths in this faith tradition, with the idea that as we look at other faith traditions, perhaps it will stimulate in our own thinking what our personal pledges might be to ourselves. So this is his beautiful promise to himself. Aware of the suffering caused by sexual misconduct, I vow to cultivate responsibility and learn ways to protect the safety and integrity of individuals, couples, families, and society. I am determined not to engage in sexual relations without love and a long-term commitment. To preserve the happiness of myself and others, I am determined to respect my commitments and the commitments of others. I will do everything in my power to protect children from sexual abuse and to prevent couples and families from being broken by sexual misconduct. A beautiful and intensely personal commitment. And there is something in the Judeo-Christian tradition in the Ten Commandments that relates to it. It's a restriction against coveting, wanting, going for somebody else's partner. It's an instruction against focusing one's desire in possessing things that are not yours. And when Jesus spoke about the commandments, especially the ones that relate to stealing, killing, and adultery, he took it a little further than saying it's just something you shouldn't do. He said, and also it's problematic if you think about it, if you dwell on it, if you normalize it, if you harbor it in your mind. It's probably as bad, he said. And I can see why. Because what is given safe passage in my mind, which is my personal use of the creative mind of the universe, is the first step in normalizing it and creating something for my and our future. So if I normalize harmful thoughts, what kind of future is possible? The next one is mindful speaking and listening, mindful communication. And here's what he says as a promise to himself. Aware of the suffering caused by unmindful speech and the inability to listen to others, I vow to cultivate loving speech and deep listening in order to bring joy and happiness to others and relieve others of their suffering. Knowing that words can create happiness or suffering, I vow to learn to speak truthfully with words that inspire self-confidence, joy, and hope. I'm determined not to spread news that I do not know to be certain, and not to criticize or condemn things of which I'm not sure. I will refrain from uttering words that can cause division or discord, or that can cause the family or the community to break. I will make all efforts to reconcile and resolve all conflicts, however small. Again, in the Jewish and Christian tradition, in the Ten Commandments, it is clearly supported. It says, thou shalt not bear false witness against anyone. And in Proverbs, it says that among the 6 things that the divine particularly dislikes, 3 are a lying tongue, a false witness, and one who sows discord among people. Wow. I think I'm the same. I strongly dislike dishonesty and deceit. I strongly dislike it when others are dishonest or deceitful. And I particularly dislike it when I am. I particularly do not like the consequences of indulging deceitful words in my heart, because I don't like who I am when I'm doing that, and I do not like the body sensation when I travel into that, no matter how small. I think of the commandments not so much as a threat, thou shalt not, but as an explanation of the downside of doing so. So I try to be honest in my speaking, and I try to be honest in my mind before the words come out of my mouth. And Marshall Rosenberg, who passed away just this February, has helped me tremendously in this regard through his book, Nonviolent Communication. And although I never met him, I think of him as a mentor because of how much that book has shaped my communication style. And I read it every year, whether I need it or not. And what I've learned from that is that mindful speaking and communication to me means the sincere inclination to strip all mischief away from my words, starting when they are in my mind before they even come out of my mouth. Stripping the mischief away when I listen to you and I add meaning onto what you've said without verifying it. Now, the next precept, obviously, I have so much resistance to it that it fell off the slide. And it's the one that has to do with ingesting wholesome substances. Yeah? Mindful consuming. And it's, again, it's a Buddhist perspective about refraining from intoxicants. And in comparison to Christianity, Jesus invited his students to share wine as a way of engendering community and celebrating the teaching. You know, he did, however, warn against being unfocused and not paying attention as a result of drunkenness. He did. And he was talking about the great changes that were to come, according to him, and he said, be careful. Lest your hearts become weighed down with carousing and drunkenness and the anxieties of life, because then you'll lose your alertness and you won't be able to pay attention to what is changing and developing. It's very practical. Watch that drunkenness doesn't get in the way of your spiritual development. Watch that intoxicants don't get in the way of your spiritual development. Here's what Thich Nhat Hanh promised to himself. Aware of the suffering caused by unmindful consumption, I vow to cultivate good health, both physical and mental, for myself, my family, and my society. By practicing mindful eating, drinking, and consuming, I vow to ingest only items that preserve peace, well-being, and joy in my body, in my consciousness, and in the collective body and consciousness of my family and society. I am determined not to use alcohol or any other intoxicants or to ingest foods or other items that contain toxins such as certain TV programs, magazines, books, films, and conversations. I am aware that to damage my body or my consciousness with these poisons is to betray my ancestors. Isn't that powerful? To betray my parents and my society and my future generations. It's so powerful. He says, I will work to transform violence, fear, anger, and confusion in myself and in my society by practicing a diet for myself. I understand that a proper diet is crucial for self-transformation and for the transformation of society. And it really brings up the question for me, what does mindful consuming mean to me? Because according to our teaching at the center, it says that whatever it is that I put into my being, whether it's through media or through food, it's going to have to first pass through my mind with the decision to consume it. So that's why we focus on the purification of our minds. How? Well, our practice is to daily spend time to recognize that eternal reality that we call spirit or life. To take time daily to explore and acknowledge our unity with it and through it with all life, our kinship. And to take time daily to effortlessly strive to realize and understand the creative nature of our thought and to use it appropriately. And to frequently practice gratitude and to live in harmony with the spiritual laws that govern the universe. That would be our practice. From our textbook, our founder said, "Since all future possibility for the human race must first find an avenue of outlet through someone's mind, we shall do well to look into our own minds for the answer to all of our problems." So I invite you to practice with me now by breathing in, exhaling, letting your eyes close if that feels comfortable, so that in this time of prayer we can each begin to recognize in our own way that eternal reality that we call spirit, or whatever word we call it, that which is endless, eternal, everywhere present. We let the words carry us into a sense of expansion so that we can understand and acknowledge our unity with all of life. That spirit being everywhere present is where I am. And that is my link to all of creation. And so I am an inheritor of the qualities of creation, of creation, of creation. My thought takes place within creation. I call my thought creative. And with awe and respect, I recognize that even this prayer that I'm speaking is an act of creation. So I let myself dwell, not only in this prayer, but for the remainder of the day, I let myself dwell on thoughts that are beneficial, all-embracing, kind and loving and mindful, so that the thoughts themselves may stimulate in me an inclination towards acting in the world in a way that lifts up all of creation and sets in motion that which is of benefit to all people. And I rededicate myself to living in harmony with the spiritual laws that govern the universe.